Hello everyone, welcome back to my garden. If you're new here, hi, I'm Dominika, I'm a horticulturist and I post balcony and container gardening content. In today's video, I want to share with you my top tips on how to deal with snails and slugs. You will be surprised just how many, especially slugs, I have in my container garden. And we are on the 7th floor in the city center. But if you click this video, you are probably dealing with the same problem. So in this episode, I want to share with you what actually works for us, container gardeners, what doesn't work at all, what's not worth your time. And I also want to highlight a couple of methods that are often recommended because they work really well in a real garden situation, but they are not really effective if you garden in containers. Alright, so before we jump into today's video, I just really briefly want to talk about snails and slugs, so please bear with me. I think it's important to understand why they do what they do. And I know we all want to protect our plants because we spend money on them, we offer time and attention, we take care of them, so no one wants their plants to be eaten by snails and slugs. But they do play an important role in the nature. They are part of the food chain. They serve as food for birds, hedgehogs, frogs, and many other creatures. They are also an important part of the ecosystem because they are decomposers. They decompose dead and decaying plant material. So they do play an important role in the ecosystem. We cannot completely eliminate them and expect everything else to still work just fine. So while protecting our plants, I think that's really important also to realize their role. So all the methods that I'm going to show you in today's video, that I'm going to share with you in today's video, they are very effective, but they are also non-harmful. Alright, to the point. Let's start with 3 things that do not work, that are not worth your time and money. Method number 1 is copper tape and copper ring. Now this method has been really popular on social media over the past couple of years. I see a lot of people recommend that method, talk about this method, but the problem is it doesn't work. And if you check out any videos online of actual gardeners putting that tape to test, you will notice that it doesn't work, that snails and slugs could not be less bothered by it. So the whole goal, the whole idea with the copper tape is that you wrap your container, you wrap the copper tape around your container, and it's supposed to act as a barrier. While snails and slugs try to glide over it, it generates mild electric charge, and it's supposed to discourage snails and slugs from going any further, so to say. But as I said, there are many videos online proving that it doesn't work. Snails and slugs could not be less bothered, they glide right through it. Now, while it can still potentially work on some certain species of snails, it's not at all gonna work for slugs because slugs are more clever. If you lift any of your containers in your container garden, you will notice maybe that there are some slugs hiding under the pot because slugs like to use drainage hole. They go up the drainage hole, they resurface on top of soil, and that's how they access your plant, and that's how they will start munching on your plant. So even if you wrap the pot with a copper wire, with a copper tape, it's not really gonna work. Second problem with that tape is that if you have a lot of plants and you want to protect every single one of them, obviously that's at some point it will start to be a little bit expensive because those copper tapes aren't cheap. And if you want to protect every single one of your plants, obviously that adds up the costs. Another thing is that I personally don't find it very aesthetical. If that's an important part of the gardening for you, if that's what you care about, and you use some beautiful decorative containers, obviously you're not gonna want to wrap the whole thing in a copper tape. So personally, I would recommend skipping that method altogether. Alright, the second method that I do not recommend for container and balcony gardeners is homemade traps. Now, I know many gardeners that swear by it, and it's one of those methods that I said work really well in a real garden situation, but don't necessarily work in a balcony or a container garden environment. So the whole idea with homemade traps is usually to bury them in the ground. For example, you fill a pot or a jar with beer or with milk, you bury it into the ground, and then as snails and slugs glide over the soil or over the grass, they fall into it because they are attracted by the sweet scent of it. They fall into it and they drown. And as I said, I've heard from many gardeners that this method works really well for them. But I have tested it at some point in my container garden and I have never caught one single snail or slug in it. And as I said, I have plenty of slugs in my garden. I think that it just doesn't work because the second we put it on top of, like on the floor, the slugs just don't go up the pot or up the jar that you placed and just, you know, go to drink the beer or whatever that might be. I think that works well if you bury it, not necessarily if you just place it on top of the floor. So it has never worked for me, and it's not something I would recommend, because in a balcony garden like this, you will have a lot of insects that come visit all of these beautiful flowers, and oftentimes I would find some insects drowned actually in that jar of beer or milk. So I think this method does more harm than good, and I do not recommend it for container gardeners. And the third method that I think is not worth your time and money are chemical pesticides. There are many different chemical and organic pesticides available on the market in the form of granules or pellets. But obviously, whenever you use a chemical pesticide, you need to really assess all the risks involved, especially if you have pets or kids. These type of products could be ingested, especially if you are leaving out pellets or colorful granules. Oftentimes they are blue, so that may be attractive to kids. They could be ingested by your pets, so there's a lot of risk involved. Another problem with these is they will dissolve with water, with rain, so it's something that will have to be reapplied. And I think that in general, snails and slugs are really difficult to target because you can't really apply the product directly on them. You are just hoping that they will ingest it and they will die. So especially in a container garden, you know, there's a lot of nooks and crannies, so you will have to spread that product a little bit everywhere, and obviously I don't think that you would want to be spreading some blue granules all over your floor, all over your terrace. So I think that this method will not prove to be effective in a container garden, and in general I think that there are better methods out there than using chemical pesticides that could be potentially harmful to kids, pets, and to other beneficial creatures that live in your garden. Alright, so if none of this works, what actually does? I tested different methods in my own garden, in my client's garden, and what I found most effective is not targeting the snails and slugs directly, but rather prioritizing protecting your plants. The first thing I recommend you do is cover the drainage hole. This alone has been a game changer for me. As I said at the beginning, slugs will hide underneath the pots and they will try to reach your plant through the drainage hole, going up the pot and resurfacing on top of soil. So by covering the drainage hole, you are blocking their access. Now, hear me out. You want to cover the drainage hole, but you don't want to block it because you still need water to be able to evacuate. So what I use in my garden are mesh hole pads. You can buy them online. They are really inexpensive and they are reusable. You can also repurpose those mesh bags that you usually buy your vegetables in at the grocery store, or you could use a piece of landscape fabric. All of these materials are porous. They will allow water to pass through, but they will prevent slugs from entering the pot through the drainage hole. Step number 2 is mulch. I cannot recommend you enough to mulch your potted plants. Mulch has so many great benefits, and especially coarse mulch like bark, shredded bark, or pine cones. These will make it really difficult for slugs and snails to, slide on top of it. Everywhere where I used pine cone mulch, I have not seen any slug damage. They just don't go for these plants anymore. And they're still in my garden, as you could see at the beginning of this video. But pine cone mulch has been a game changer. I try to put it in every single one of my containers. As much as I love pine cones because you can source them for free, they are easily available, and I just like the aesthetics of it. For certain plants I don't use pine cones because for me they just don't go together, like aesthetically. For example, tropical plants. Somehow I don't associate tropical plants with pine cones. So for certain plants I use an alternative, which is sheep's wool. Sheep's wool is a very effective mulch and also a very effective snails and slugs repellent. It just has this weird hairy fibrous texture. It's so difficult for slugs to glide over it. So this works really, really well. You can buy them online. You can find them in most garden centers. You can buy them from hardware stores, and they come in pre-cut circles like these, so you can just kind of hug your plant. You place it on top of soil, obviously. You can find them in many different diameters, so you can buy exactly the size that you need for certain containers, or you can also buy them on a roll like this. I think that this is more cost effective, because then you have just larger amount of it, and you can cut it to size as you need it. So I just stocked up on some more because it works really well. All right, and the final step, number 3, is to lift your pots off the floor, elevate your pots. This is what I do in my garden. Initially, I did it just to add some height and dimension, but I quickly realized that this works really, really well against snails and slugs. The higher you place your plants, the lower the risk that those snails and slugs are gonna reach them. So what I use in my gardens are some old chairs and stools. I use overturned pots. I use plant stands, whatever that might be. So you can have fun with it, play with it, and you can elevate those most sensitive plants. All right, you guys, and just some final thoughts. I know that there's a lot of people out there recommending all kinds of magical mixtures and all kinds of homemade solutions. Sometimes we may think that because something is edible or because something is natural, it's a good idea to use it in the garden. But unfortunately, most cases, what is supposed to be edible or what is supposed to be used in the kitchen, like a dishwash soap or baking soda, are not really a good idea to use in the garden, to use directly on your plants. They can do more harm than good. They can seriously damage your plants, and they can even kill your plants. So please be careful when applying these kind of homemade solutions. Always make sure that you know exactly what you are using and why you are using it, because it would be a shame to use something in a goodwill and then end up with damaged or dead plants. Alright, that being said, I do hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, I would appreciate if you could leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more container gardening content. If you know of any natural, non-harmful solutions that maybe you've been using that have been working really well in your garden, don't hesitate to share them in the comment section. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see each other in the next video.